the Taliban have taken the country by storm. It seemed to happen so quickly, after Biden announced the withdrawal of U.S. troops, which has been a talking point of the president's ever since I could vote. We're going to get out of Afghanistan. We're going to get out of Afghanistan. But the Taliban has taken, control extremely quickly. Rob, what is your take on this? How come nobody saw this coming? How come this couldn't have been predicted?
Well, I think it could have been predicted. I think if anybody had a sober analysis of the situation, they would have seen that the government that has been propped up in one form or another by over 20 years by US imperialism in particular, but supported by many other countries, is really it's a government with no social basis. Even in the last election last year, although Ghani won the election, it was on a turnout of less than 20%. And it's quite clear that there was no real support. The regime has been racked by corruption, undemocratic moves and so on. And over 20 years, the US in particular, but other imperialist countries have joined in with this as well. But they've spent $2.2 trillion on the intervention in Afghanistan. That was 5 times the accumulated GNP or GDP for those 20 years. If instead of putting troops in, it had been financing education, healthcare, proper jobs, the Afghan people would now be living in a relatively well-off situation. You wouldn't have the widespread poverty. You would have had probably a more popular government. And of course, the Taliban would have no basis in society because Taliban gets its support from those layers that are absolutely desperate to get out of the current situation they're faced in. Anybody who had a really sober analysis would have seen that the government that has been supported by the imperialist powers was actually a fiction. It didn't have a real basis in society. And the Taliban took over, not particularly because they were super strong, but because the government and the intervention itself was so weak and it just had no support. You could see it crumbling. That some of the warlords who in the past were part of the Northern Alliance, who fought the previous Taliban government and so on, they were prepared, if the Afghan army had agreed, to have a joint campaign against the Taliban to stop it coming to power. But then the army collapsed and the warlords fled the country because they saw no future for themselves. That really indicates how bad the situation was because of this intervention.